The words hit me like a closed fist to the chest. Not a slap. Not a nudge. A full closed fist punch that knocked the air clean out of my lungs. I stood there in my own kitchen, the kitchen where I had cooked breakfast for my daughter every morning for 18 years, and I heard my son-in-law say it again, slower this time, like he was explaining something to a child who was too dense to understand the first time. This is not your house anymore, Gerald. Act like a guest or find somewhere else to be. I was 64 years old. I had built that kitchen with my own hands, replacing every cabinet the summer after my wife passed. I had refinished the hardwood floors in that hallway. I had painted every single wall in that house twice, and I was standing in my own kitchen being told to act like a guest by a man I had welcomed into my home 3 years earlier when he and my daughter needed a place to land. I didn't say anything. I set down my coffee mug, walked to the back porch, and sat in the chair that had been my wife's favorite. The wood was cold through my shirt. My hands were steady, but something in my chest had gone very, very quiet. The way a field goes quiet right before a storm comes through. That was the night I started paying attention. My daughter's name is Claire. She is 31 years old, and she has her mother's eyes green, with a little gold in them when the light is right. When she was small, she used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms and tell me the thunder was just God rearranging furniture. I used to think about that image for years afterward, the two of us in the old armchair while the rain came down, her completely unbothered as long as I was there. Her husband's name is Marcus. He is 34, and he works in sales, and he has the kind of confidence that comes not from accomplishment, but from the simple fact of never having been told no in any meaningful way. His handshake is firm. His smile arrives before his eyes catch up to it. I noticed that the first time I met him, but Claire was happy, and her mother had been gone 2 years by then, and happiness was something I had stopped taking for granted. They got married in the spring. I paid for most of the wedding. I did not mention that to anyone, including Claire, and I have never brought it up since. 8 months after the wedding, Marcus lost his job. Not immediately their fault. The company downsized. These things happen. They had an apartment in the city, but the rent was $1,500 a month, and Marcus's severance was gone in 6 weeks. Claire called me on a Tuesday evening and asked if they could stay with me while Marcus looked for something new. I said yes, before she finished the sentence. That was 3 years ago. The first year was fine, or close enough to fine that I did not examine it too carefully. There was noise in the house again, which I had not realized I missed. Claire cooked dinner on Sundays. Marcus found contract work. Nothing steady, but he was trying. I told myself this was what family did. I told myself my wife would have done the same. The second year, things shifted. The shifts were small at first. The way a door settles in its frame so gradually you don't notice until one day it no longer closes properly. Marcus stopped looking for full-time work and started calling the contract jobs his consulting business. He set up an office in what had been my den, moved my books into boxes in the garage without asking, and bought a standing desk with money I later found out came from a credit card opened in my name. I confronted him about the credit card. He said Claire had mentioned I wouldn't mind. Claire, when I asked her, said she thought Marcus had cleared it with me. They stood in the hallway together, two unified fronts, and I looked at my daughter's face, that slight hardening around her jaw she had gotten from me, and I decided the amount was small enough to absorb. $212. I wrote it off. I should have written something else off instead. By the third year, Marcus had started having his friends over on weekday evenings. Loud evenings. Evenings that ran past 11. Evenings where I would come downstairs for a glass of water and find 4 strangers in my living room and no acknowledgement that I lived there. My mail started coming opened. Not always, just occasionally, as though someone had started checking it and then gotten bored. The thermostat was adjusted from the 68 degrees I had kept it for 15 years to a steady 74, and when I changed it back, it would return to 74 within the hour. These were not dramatic crimes. That is the thing I kept telling myself. These were inconveniences, adjustments, the tax of living with other people. I had been alone for a long time. Maybe I had gotten too set in my ways. Maybe the problem was me. I had a friend named Dwight who had known me for 40 years, since we worked together at the plant before I started my own contracting business. Dwight was not a man who softened things. One Saturday morning, I drove to his house and sat at his kitchen table and told him all of it, including the credit card, including the standing desk, including the comment about acting like a guest. Dwight poured us both coffee and was quiet for a moment. "Gerald," he said, "you know what you're describing. I know what I'm describing. Then why are you still describing it like you're not sure?" I drove home and sat in the driveway for a while. The house looked the same as it always had: white siding, black shutters, the oak tree in the front yard that I had planted the year Claire was born. It was a good house. It had been a good house for 31 years. I had worked 6 days a week for the first decade of my contracting business to pay it off, and I had paid it off 11 years ago, and I had the deed in a fireproof box in the back of my bedroom closet. My name was on that deed. Mine alone. My birthday is in October. I turned 65 last October, which is a number that carries a certain weight in this country. Medicare, Social Security. The moment when the culture at large grants you permission to be officially old. Claire had asked me in September what I wanted to do, and I told her what I told her every year, that a quiet dinner at home was all I needed. She had smiled and said she would make my favorite, the roast she had learned from her mother, with the potatoes and the green beans the way I liked them. I looked forward to it more than I probably should have. I am not a man who requires much ceremony, but birthdays had become harder since my wife passed, and the idea of sitting at my own table and eating my wife's recipe with my daughter felt like something solid to hold on to. The evening started normally enough. I came downstairs at 6, dressed, and found the table set, and the kitchen smelling the way that kitchen was supposed to smell. Claire was at the stove. Marcus was in the living room with his phone. 2 men I had seen once or twice before were sitting at my dining room table, one of them in my chair. I want to be precise here, because precision matters to me. My chair is at the head of the table. It is a specific chair, slightly taller than the others, with arms, because my back had gotten difficult in my late 50s, and a chair with arms helps me sit and stand. My wife had bought it for me. It was not interchangeable with the other chairs at that table. One of Marcus's friends was sitting in it. I looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at me with the expression he had, the one that was almost apologetic, but had no actual apology in it. "Oh, hey, Gerald." "Yeah, I hope it's okay." I invited Derek and Phil. They were free tonight. "It's my birthday dinner," I said. "Right, yeah, totally." He did not move. He did not tell Derek or Phil to move. Claire made plenty of food. So, Claire came out of the kitchen with a dish towel over her shoulder and looked at the table and then at me, and for just a moment I saw something cross her face, not guilt, exactly, but awareness. The awareness of someone who knows something is wrong and has decided not to be the one to address it. "There's plenty, Dad," she said. I pulled out one of the side chairs and sat in it. I sat in a side chair at my own table on my 65th birthday, while a stranger sat in my chair, and I watched my daughter serve everyone the roast she had made from her mother's recipe, and I did not say one word about it. I ate my food. I answered questions from Derek and Phil about my contracting work, and I was polite. And when they left at 9 o'clock and Claire went upstairs, Marcus turned off the lights in the living room without wishing me a happy birthday. I sat in the dark for a few minutes. Then, I went to bed. I lay on top of the covers for a long time that night. I am not a man who cries easily, my father's influence, and not entirely a good one, but something was happening behind my eyes that was adjacent to crying. A pressure and a heat. I thought about my wife. I thought about the October morning she had gotten up before me and decorated the kitchen with paper streamers because she said every birthday deserves streamers, even the unimportant ones. I thought about the deal I had silently been making with myself for 3 years. Be patient. They'll find their footing. This is temporary. Family takes care of family. I thought about what Dwight had said. Why are you still describing it like you're not sure? I was sure. I had been sure for a long time. I had just been choosing not to act on what I was sure about, because acting on it meant admitting that the thing I was most afraid of was true, that my daughter had let this happen. Not orchestrated it, not maliciously designed it, but let it happen, the way water lets itself into a house passively, without force, finding every unsealed place. I turned 65 that night in a side chair in my own home. I decided that was the last concession I was making. The next morning, I drove to see a man named Arthur Hollis, who had handled my legal work for 20 years. Arthur's office was small and smelled like coffee and old paper, and Arthur himself was 72 and sharp as a new blade. I sat across from his desk and told him everything, beginning to end, including the credit card and the standing desk and the comment about acting like a guest. Arthur listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I valued about him. When I finished, he said, "How long have they been living there?" 3 years and 4 months. "Any written rental agreement?" "Nothing." "Any money exchanged?" "Any contribution to utilities or mortgage?" "The mortgage is paid off." "Utilities, no." "Nothing." Arthur tapped his pen against his notepad. "In this state, Gerald, after 30 days of continuous residence, they are tenants at will, which means you can't simply ask them to leave on a Tuesday and expect them gone by Wednesday. You need to serve formal notice. How long does the process take? Done properly, cleanly, with no contestation? 6 to 8 weeks, potentially less if they choose not to fight it. But I'd recommend we do this thoroughly, so there is no room for complications. What do I need? Documentation. Evidence that the residence has been yours alone, that you've borne all expenses, that there has been no tenancy agreement. Bank statements. Utility bills. The deed. I'd also recommend you secure a copy of that credit card account in your name, as it may become relevant. I had a small notebook in my jacket pocket. I wrote everything down. Arthur looked at me over his glasses. "Gerald, you understand this will be a significant disruption." "It already is," I said. I drove from Arthur's office to the library. Not because I couldn't print things at home, I had a printer, but because I did not want anything happening in that house that Marcus might notice before I was ready. I pulled 3 months of bank statements. I printed utility bills going back 2 years. I printed the credit card statement in my name showing Marcus's charges, which by then had grown to $460, spread across restaurant tabs and an online subscription service for something I had never heard of. I kept everything in my car, in a folder in the spare wheel well. The next 3 weeks, I watched differently. I had always noticed things, that is the nature of a man who spent his career looking at structures, identifying what was load-bearing and what was decoration. But I had been looking while telling myself stories about what I saw. Now, I looked without the stories. Marcus worked, at most, 12 hours a week. The rest of his time he spent on his phone, on his standing desk, entertaining friends, and watching things on my television at volumes that vibrated the walls. He ate my groceries without contributing to them. He had not done a single home repair or improvement in 3 years, despite knowing I was the contractor who had built half this neighborhood. He called me Gerald, not because I asked him to, but because calling me anything warmer would have required acknowledging a relationship he had never actually bought into. Claire worked full-time as a dental hygienist. She was tired when she came home. She was, I believed, genuinely tired, and genuinely unaware of how fully she had outsourced her judgment in her own marriage. That was the hardest part to sit with. Not Marcus, who was simply what he was, but Claire, who was someone I had raised and loved and who had somewhere along the way started seeing me through her husband's eyes. 4 weeks after my birthday, the eviction notice was ready. Arthur had prepared everything meticulously. The notice to quit, the legal documentation, the timeline. I drove to his office on a Thursday morning and signed everything. Arthur would have it formally served the following Monday. I did not tell Claire in advance. I had considered it, gone back and forth on it, lain awake with it on multiple nights. But every time I imagined sitting her down and explaining what was coming, I could see the exact way it would unfold. She would tell Marcus. Marcus would become defensive and strategic, and something that needed to happen cleanly would become a war of attrition fought in my own hallways. I had enough of other people's strategies being conducted in my home. The process server came on a Monday afternoon. I was at Dwight's house. I did not want to be present for it. Dwight and I watched a game and drank coffee and talked about things that had nothing to do with evictions or birthdays or chairs, and I was grateful for every minute of it. My phone rang at 3:47, then at 3:51, Then at 3:54, 3:58, 4:02, I watched the calls come in and did not answer them. Claire. Marcus. Claire again. A number I didn't recognize that was likely one of Marcus's friends who had somehow gotten involved. Dwight looked at my phone screen and said nothing. He understood. By the time I drove home that evening, I had 23 missed calls. Marcus was in the living room when I came through the front door. He was sitting forward on the couch with his hands between his knees, the body language of a man who had decided he was the injured party and was composing himself accordingly. Gerald. His voice was controlled. The smile was fully offline this time. I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. I don't believe there has, I said. I set my keys on the hook by the door where I had always set them. We have nowhere to go. You have 6 weeks, I said. Arthur Hollis's number is on the paperwork. If you have questions about the legal specifics, he can answer them. Claire is your daughter. I looked at him for a moment. I know who my daughter is. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and went to the back porch. The same chair, the same cold wood. The oak tree in the backyard had dropped most of its leaves by then, and the branches were clean against the gray sky. I sat there until the light faded, and I listened to the house. And eventually I heard Claire's car in the driveway. She came through the back door. I heard her stop in the kitchen, and then the screen door opened and she stood at the edge of the porch. She had been crying. Her eyes were her mother's eyes, green with a little gold in them, and they were red at the rims. Dad. Sit down, Claire. She sat in the chair beside mine. For a long time, neither of us said anything. The neighbor's dog barked twice and went quiet. Why didn't you tell me? She said finally. Because I needed it to actually happen, I said. Not to become a conversation that went on for 6 months and ended with me apologizing for bringing it up. That's not fair. No, I agreed. A lot of this hasn't been fair. She was quiet. Do you remember, I said, what I told you the day you went to college? She looked at me. I told you that you could always come home, that the door was always open. Do you remember that? Yes, I meant it. I still mean it. I turned to look at her directly. But Marcus is not coming back into this house. That is not a negotiation. That is not something Arthur Hollis can help you argue around. When the 6 weeks are up, if you want to come home while you figure things out, your room will be there. But Marcus is not coming back into this house. She started to cry again. Not dramatically, just quietly. I had watched her cry since she was 3 years old. I had held her through every version of it. I did not hold her now. Not because I didn't want to, but because some things need to be felt fully before they can be understood. He's my husband, she said. I know he is. You're asking me to choose. I'm asking you to see clearly, I said. What you do with what you see is yours to decide. She left the porch and went upstairs. I sat outside until 9 o'clock. The temperature dropped, and I didn't move. The next 6 weeks were the most uncomfortable weeks I had spent in my own home since the months after my wife died. Marcus made his displeasure ambient, not loud, not threatening, but constant. Things were moved. The thermostat went to 76. A door that I needed to pass through multiple times a day developed a habit of being locked from the other side. None of it was actionable. All of it was deliberate. I documented everything, dates and times in a small notebook. Not because I needed the documentation for Arthur. The legal clock was running, and Marcus knew it. But because the act of writing things down kept me measured. Dwight called every few days. I played racquetball on Tuesday mornings at the Y for the first time in 4 years, because I needed somewhere to put the physical pressure of all of it. Claire stayed in the house through the 3rd week, then moved into an apartment with a woman she worked with. She did not tell me this directly. I learned it because Marcus mentioned it in passing, not with any visible distress, which told me something about Marcus that I filed away. She called me the night she moved out and we talked for 40 minutes. The longest conversation we had managed in 2 years. It was not a good conversation in any conventional sense. There was too much unresolved weight in it, too many things circling that we weren't yet ready to name. But it was an honest one, and honest felt like the right place to start. The day Marcus left, he left in the morning while I was at the hardware store. I came home to a house that was quieter than it had been in 3 years. I walked through every room, the den where my books had been boxed up, the thermostat, which I set back to 68, the kitchen where I had been told to act like a guest, the dining room with the table that had my chair at the head of it. I sat in my chair. It sounds like a small thing. It was not a small thing. I sat in my chair at my own table in the afternoon light, and I felt the particular quality of silence that is not empty but full. Full of everything that had been crowded out by 3 years of accommodating someone else's. Comfort at the expense of my own dignity. My wife's roast recipe was in the blue binder in the third kitchen drawer. The oak tree in the backyard that I had planted the year Claire was born was 65 years old now, same as me, still standing. I have spoken to Claire 11 times since Marcus moved out. The conversations have been getting longer and easier by increments. She is not where she needs to be, yet in understanding what happened, and I am not going to rush her toward it. People arrive at clarity on their own schedule, and she is her mother's daughter, which means she is stubborn and fair and ultimately honest, and I believe she will get there. Last Tuesday she came for dinner. I made the roast. I set 2 places at the table, Claire at the side, me at the head, and we ate her mother's recipe together. And she told me about her apartment and her co-workers and a book she had been reading, and I told her about a contracting job I had taken on to keep busy, a young couple's kitchen renovation 2 streets over. At the end of the night, she stood in the doorway and looked at me the way she used to when she was small, when she was deciding whether something was safe. "I'm sorry, Dad," she said, "for letting things get so far." "I know you are," I said. "I'm sorry it took something large to change them." She hugged me and went to her car, and I stood on the front porch until the taillights were gone. The October air was cold and clean. The oak tree was bare again. I went inside and washed the dishes and turned off the lights the way I liked them turned off. I checked the thermostat. 68 degrees. I went to bed in a house that was mine, that had always been mine, that would remain mine. That was enough. More than enough. That was everything.